Welcome to the Idea Review. Today we will be discussing The Law in 60 Seconds, a book written by barrister and new author Christian Weaver. And I have to say, it's one of the most important books I think I've ever read. Welcome, Christian.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction as well. I really appreciate it. I mean, great to be here.
Of course. So let's get straight into it. Having read your book over the last week or so, I think is a really, really important read, and I'm really glad you've written it.
Thank you.
I think, I don't know how much you've heard this, but I think that it's probably understated how important it is for people to be fully aware of their rights
Of course.
and to know how to kind of maneuver in society. So in terms of the conversations you've had,
Yes.
what have people told you have been the most important parts of the book? Has it been, a particular section, or has it been everything as a whole?
It's such an interesting question. And I think actually it's the content on a whole. And I think the reason for that is because people don't often realize how little they know about the law
Right.
until they're presented with a book like this, and they think, oh my gosh, when it came to my landlord, when it came to the shop, the gentleman in the shop, when it came to my employer, I just didn't know these things. So, and I would even add, as I was writing the book, there were things I learned, and I thought, I'm a lawyer and I've never come across this before. And to consider that I've been through law school, I'm in a chambers now, it makes you think if somebody's never been exposed to that world, what hope do they really have in properly understanding their rights? So I think what I've been surprised at now is actually how just widely actually the book's been of value to people in terms of even the chapters that maybe I didn't think would necessarily be so impactful. So
Okay.
yeah, really broad actually, Danny.
So you touched on your background there. So can you just give us a quick overview of your training and your current experience in law, and then how you came about kind of writing this book?
Of course. So, born and bred in the beautiful city of Nottingham, and I was educated there as well. I went to Nottingham Trent University. I did my postgraduate there, so the bar training course. I did that at Nottingham Law School also. Then I spent a bit of time here in London, actually, working for a charity called Inquest, who deal with contentious deaths in state custody. I also volunteered at Liberty. But all throughout that process, I was applying for pupillage. And because of the type of work I wanted to go into, which importantly was work that was representing perhaps the little man against the all-powerful state, there are only a few chambers in the country that do exclusively that type of work. Garden Court North, where I'm at now, of course, being one of them. Now, Garden Court is based in Manchester, so I commenced my pupillage in 2019. And must admit, COVID-19 came in, so it made things a bit tricky. So I moved back to Nottingham for parts. I'm back up in Manchester now. But in terms of the law in 60 seconds, that came about actually in 2018. I was living in London at the time. So yeah, this was when I was actually working for Inquest. And are you a Londoner, actually? I should ask. Are you a Londoner yourself?
Yes, yeah, I am.
Yeah, okay. So you remember 2018, there was knife crime was all over the news agenda. Stop and search was being cited as the way to combat that. But I felt what was particularly problematic was that in the discourse around stop and search, all too often, the fact that there are so many, or the disproportionality in terms of the stop and search of black individuals was being overlooked. So when people were calling for its increased use, I was concerned that actually they weren't also appreciating that there were a group of people that were going to perhaps feel more victimized as a result of that. So obviously I can't, unfortunately, tell them at police how to do their job or anything like that. But what I could do is inform my friends and peers and perhaps wider community of their rights if they found themselves in a situation where they were stopped and searched. And yeah, that was the intention of the first video. I don't think I've had any subscribers on my YouTube channel. I think I maybe made it for that purpose now I think about it. And I put it out there, and I was really surprised at actually how much of a pickup there was for it.
Okay.
And I think to me, that exposed the void that exists in terms of people knowing their legal rights. And from then it snowballed. And I always say it shouldn't fall to, as I was then a soon-to-be lawyer, it shouldn't fall to soon-to-be lawyers to inform the public about their rights. It really should be the state. If there are protections that exist or laws that exist to protect us, we ought to know about them. If there are laws that exist and the breaking of them can result in punishment, we ought to know them. So I could go on forever, dummy, but I think that's where it really started. And from then, like I say, being exposed to that void made me just realize that I need to continue doing this. And that then actually led to the book, because my now literary agent, got in touch, and she said, have you thought about turning this concept of these legal videos into a book? And it wasn't something I thought about at the time, but as I thought about it more, I realized that actually, what could be more valuable than having a permanent, well, I say permanent in the sense of course, the law changes, but permanent compared to YouTube videos that can be deleted, there's nothing better than having a permanent thing you can have with you that can inform you of your legal rights. And I used to think that someone once said that, made a joke, but I don't think it's actually a joke anymore. But they joked that with a book, let's say there was one day a government that wanted to strip away everybody's rights, and they called for the deletion of any video that may kind of that sought to empower the ordinary citizen, and they sought to delete all those videos from YouTube. Of course, my channel would be one, and subsequently a book would be valuable. And I used to think that was such a far-fetched example, but I think the way the government's are acting now, actually books like this that can never really be deleted are so important.
I like that. And in the book, you've covered digital rights as well,
Yes.
which is important, which we'll touch on.
Sure.
But I think that's all really good. And I think like the story makes sense in terms of the progression. I remember seeing one of the videos. I don't think I saw it initially. I think I saw a BBC post about one of your videos.
Okay.
And I think that was the first time. And it was quite revolutionary that, here it was like, literally, let me explain this. I think it was about stop and search, the one I saw first. It was like, let me explain this in 60 seconds. And when you're able to do that in, a quick period of time, then you keep the engagement high and so on with people.
Do you know what? And I'm so glad you took that away from it, because the reason, I speculate that a reason why people don't maybe take more of an interest in learning their rights, and I always kind of hasten to add, not that it's, the state should be doing this in the very first place, but nonetheless, I think a key reason people often don't take the steps to learn about their rights is because they deem it to be something that's going to be too complicated to learn about or too time consuming to learn about. So as a result of that, I thought, well, if the title of the thing can be The Law in 60 Seconds, then that means that from the moment you click that video, it's only going to take 60 seconds of your time. So even in the event that it's not valuable, you've only lost 60 seconds. And kind of by very definition, something being only 60 seconds can't be that complicated.
Right.
And I was hoping that would address the issue of people thinking, maybe I won't view this because it will be too complicated. So the title was very deliberate, actually, to try and tackle that problem I perceived.
Okay. In that same vein, the thing I like about the human rights chapter of the book, and it makes sense that it comes at the start, is that it's really important for people to see the rights crystallized, right? So we talk about human rights all the time. I have a human right to this and that and this and that. But how often do people see the rights listed, right? I mean, not very often, not unless you've gone to the European Convention website or you've gone onto, .gov to look at legislation, right?
Of course.
So many people who buy this book or who are given the book are probably going to see their human rights kind of listed for the first time. What do you think about that?
I'm so pleased about that, dummy.
Yeah.
And I think a key reason for that as well is that fundamentally when it comes to human rights, we're talking about rights that, exist between you as a citizen and public authorities, right? And I think it's extremely dangerous when public authorities have a belief that the public aren't aware of their human rights.
Absolutely.
Because I think that is a recipe actually for exploitation and abuses of power. And I truly believe that if it's known, that generally in society people have an awareness of human rights or of their human rights, that near enough has the automatic effect of ensuring that authorities actually take better care of us because they don't want to fall foul of that and there be consequences. So I'm really pleased about that, and I think, especially in relation to human rights specifically, look, these are things that affect, or these are things that we all have, it doesn't matter your race, your background, height, weight, shape, anything like that. They're things we all have. So I think even in terms of you being in a position where you can not only help yourself, but help others around you, if you have just a foundational knowledge of your human rights, anybody you encounter, you can actually share that bit of law with them, and it will be of use to them. So I'm really pleased about that part, Dami.
Yeah, I just think it's really important, like in the same way that, and I think maybe like this is where, your point about the state comes in terms of education, maybe, you know, curriculums really need to be looked at now, and especially like with the digital aspect of things, we really need to make sure that, you know, children essentially are taught exactly what their rights in society are, the potential ways that they may abuse them, how the state can potentially limit them,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. So when you have an engaged, when you have a society which is aware of its rights and is engaged in the defense of its rights, it means that people are less prepared to accept injustice.
Okay.
Because the
Absolutely.
law is there to accept them. And that's part of the work you're doing at the Chambers. So how do you think, how has your work in Chambers kind of fed into the book, and the book fed into your work in Chambers?
I think there's a lot of crossover actually, and I think that's because when you boil everything down, it's about the little person against the all-powerful.
Right.
And I think inquests are always, in fact, inquests are the pro board work I do, but in inquests you often have, it actually sounds kind of, it's such a strange thought actually, but it's the reality. You have often just a family going up against a state institution to try and find out how their loved one died in the care of that state institution. So, I mean, if you just imagine that, and the fact that the state institution, you know, through taxpayer money, will probably have, you know, some very experienced lawyers fighting their case, and you as a family are just there independently trying to find answers as to how your loved one came to their death. It is, I can think of a few examples of just a gross power imbalance, and the reality is that the parties in court have different objectives. So if you're there as a family, you could, or as a family member, you could legitimately be thinking, this is the one opportunity I have in front of a coroner to really try and find out how my loved one died. You know, after this process, the window of opportunity is effectively lost. So that's your goal. But then if you're a lawyer representing the state body, you're there, I would argue, your main concern is reputation management. You don't want the body you're representing to be seen in a negative light, and for that to be reported in the papers. And I just think that's going to be that side's objectives, okay. But then it's so important that families have lawyers themselves that representing them, so actually there can be some form of fair hearing in order that the family can actually get the answers that they want. So I've lost my train of thought a bit slightly actually in terms of the actual initial question, but yes, but certainly there it taps into the imbalances of power that exist. So, and I think the deeper I get into my career and I do more cases like that, the further or the greater I realize the importance of books like this. Because, you know, you often see people going into court, and just to think, you know, they how best to articulate this? A person can go into court and they actually have no knowledge of the law at all. So they're actually at the mercy of the judges and their lawyer and the other side's lawyer. And I think, you know, if this is going to be one of the scariest moments of your life, it is so important, I feel, that you're able to kind of arm yourself with a bit of knowledge of the law before you go in and have your hearing that might in some way change the trajectory of your life. And I hope in some ways the book is able to serve in doing that.
Okay, so here's my thinking, right? I think you're right about the need for legal representation. But reading this, it occurred to me that people who kind of use the information that you provide in the book maybe feel so empowered that they feel that they don't need lawyers to have court cases, to start challenging, private car park companies or their landlords or whoever it is that they. What do you think about that? Do you think people can just stand up with
do you know what? It's an interesting question, and I feel one thing I try and make clear throughout the book is the fact that the best way to resolve matters is without going to court.
Right.
So actually, when it comes to your landlord, when it comes to the parking ticket, when it comes to your employer, when it comes to near enough anything, actually, I think if you're able to, from the start, show you have just a knowledge of the law and therefore able to write a letter that kind of weaves in a bit of legalese, and you send that to the person in authority or the body that are in issue, that often can be sufficient, because they will think, especially if that body are in the wrong, do you know what, this person knows what they're talking about, we don't want to take this to court, and it could be publicly embarrassing, let's settle things now. The moment they know, on the contrary, they can do what they want, and the tenant in the house has no clue how to complain anyway, then that's how they get away with things. So it's certainly not to kind of replace lawyers, and I try and make that really clear in the book as well, but it is certainly with the mind of, if matters are going to go to court, if that's going to be the case, it's helpful that you're informed, but hopefully it will stop that ever being the case anyway. And, that saves everybody money, that saves everybody time, that saves everybody stress. And, in addition to teaching you about your rights, the book hopes to be a book that actually just helps you have a better life overall,
right, yeah.
a more relaxed, chilled life. And I hope that, that it enables people to have that, for that to be the case, yeah.
So, okay. So I had to be in some of these situations earlier. And my opinion is that, you should, like, if you're entitled to something, then you should take advantage of it. Like, in terms of a returns policy, maybe in a shop,
Of course.
if you need it, you should take advantage of it. So I had to do this recently with a car I bought. Essentially, I bought a car. A few days later, I found out there were major problems with the car.
Oh, no.
I didn't know exactly what the law was, but I knew that, having just bought a car, there shouldn't be a major problem with it. So I wrote them a letter saying, I accepted the kind of the minor issues with the car, but this is a major issue, and it doesn't seem fair that, I've just discovered this. So I wrote this letter, and I wove in some of the legalese.
Okay.
And I got, a half price refund or a half price off the repair of the car. So I initially asked for a full repair or a refund. And after some back and forth, because of that letter, they could see that it was going to be a headache to go to court about it. So they said, okay, let's just, and then we reach an agreement.
Yes.
And then I remember something I'd heard a while ago, that most civil disagreements never end up in a trial, right? Most are kind of resolved before then. So I think the book will also help with resolving lots of issues prior to going to court hearings, which I think is good, because it's going to save the court system stress.
Yeah, and the court system needs a lot of saving of stress right now, the way things are with the cuts. I think, but you touched on a really interesting point there, and actually that's something I hope the book is able to achieve as well. And that's the fact that even the book might not even cover everything, and there might be areas where you feel that you should have some form of legal redress, but you're not actually sure exactly how or why. And what I hope the book is able to give people is almost that legal sense. So even as a barrister, there might be areas of law I don't practice in, but someone can ask me a question, and I will, of course, give the caveat of I do not practice in this area, I never have. But just knowing general principles of law, whether that be about reasonability or things like that, you're able to advise how you think the law might be in that situation.
Yeah, the word reasonable is in there a lot.
Of course. So then I'm hoping that as people read that book, even for the things that aren't covered, they think, well, okay, if in a renting situation this would happen, in a shopping situation this could happen, in this situation I imagine this might be a likely outcome. And again, most things don't go to court. So even if you write a letter, but you just show an appreciation that kind of how law generally works, that can sometimes be enough, dummy.
Good thing about the book as well was the number of things I found out that I didn't know about, things I was entitled to, that surprised me. So, for instance, the delay repay scheme.
Yes.
Everyone is entitled to delay repay if your train is more than 30 minutes late, I believe.
So 15 actually, but yeah.
Sorry, go on.
I believe some actually might be 50 minutes now.
15? Oh, wow. Okay, see, this is the thing.
More recently, I don't even know if that's in the book actually, but I'm sure I read somewhere 15 minutes.
Okay, so 15 minutes late. And so did you know that before the book? So I want to just ask you all these
Of course.
Yeah.
So delay repay is particularly, yes, I did, because when you're traveling on some of the, I won't name and shame, but when you have some of the train connections I have to get, you need to know delay repay. So I did with that. But I think even there, things like sometimes, let's say, an example I always give is if there's like a cow on the track or something.
Yeah.
You might think, oh, that's not the train company's fault, so perhaps we can't get delay repay there, but you certainly can. And I think, especially if you travel on trains a lot, over time, and especially with how expensive train fares are, you can already get a lot of money back that you're entitled to.
Right, okay.
So I think it's just absolutely imperative you know it. And even just simple things like with said train company, the moment I buy the ticket, I've already taken a photo of it because I know the train's going to be delayed. But then in case I lose the ticket or anything like that, I have the proof of, the proof of purchase.
Yeah. I did a delay repay once, and this was because I think somebody at the train company said you may be entitled to it, and by the time, but it was this process of filling out this form, and it was painful. So I just said I'm not going to bother. But it's good to know that it's there, and it's good to know that you're entitled to it.
Absolutely.
What about The drivers of hackney carriages.
Yes.
They can, so they can't refuse to take you based on the length of your journey.
Precisely. And again, that was, and often the drivers themselves, whilst they know this, they will kick up a fuss actually.
Okay.
So I remember very recently I had an inquest in Stockport and I had a lot of bags and my Airbnb it was actually close to the station, but I couldn't realistically carry it with all the bags I had. I remember the driver was furious that I got in his taxi. And because of course it was only maybe a 5-minute walk. And I didn't bother going into the whole, I know my rights, but I mean, in the end, he had to take me. And I mean, do you know what the book is there to teach you your law, but at the same time, you can always do things on top to just be a good member of society. So let's say it is the case that you are making a very short journey, and it means that when the taxi driver goes back to the train station to collect the next set of passengers, he's going to be right at the back of the line, so it's going to take maybe longer for him to get his next customer. You might give them a tip, almost to acknowledge the fact that the journey might have only cost £3, but maybe give him a fiver, just.
Right.
But because that's not the book's job. The book's job is there to tell you your rights, and how you utilize that is up to you. But it's absolutely essential that people do know, especially in the current climate we live in, where certain groups might not feel safe to walk home at night. We've seen Sarah Everard's death. I think it's important people know that you can get a hackney carriage.
Private car parks.
Yes.
Private car parks cannot clamp your car in most cases.
Indeed.
Did you know that one beforehand, or was that research?
That was something I learned.
Okay.
That was something I learned. And again, that's not to encourage everybody to go to the local private car, But again, it's important people know these things. And again, I mean, in truth, I've never heard of an instance where a private car park has clamped a car.
Okay.
But certainly, it's the sort of thing that could happen. And a person might think, oh well, I was parked there, maybe it's deserved. And actually, no, that's not what the law says. So again, it's about empowering people in those sorts of situations.
Right, because when you get into a situation about with a car, with a ticket or whatever, the company is going to have, a number of lawyers who are there to know, how to defend the company's interests. Mm-hmm. And if you don't know, then, you're always going to come out on the wrong side of those things. So
of course. And I think just in relation to parking as well, because often they have the whole, if you pay in 14 days, it's half the price. But if it's after 14 days, it doubles. And it actually gets you in a bit of a position of almost fear. Like you think, I don't know how much I want to complain about this, because if it doesn't work and all of a sudden I'm paying double what it could have been, you might think, let me just deal with this quickly. Let me just pay it now. But that can sometimes be the wrong approach, because, had you known a bit of your law, you wouldn't need to pay anything at all.
Okay, well, there we go. The fourth fact I wanted to highlight was about maternity leave.
Okay.
Women are entitled to maternity leave from day one of their employment. They don't have to work a certain number of days before they're entitled to the full maternity pay.
Indeed. And maternity pay, actually everything related to maternity is really interesting, because a lot of people wonder, do I have to tell my let's say you're going for a job interview, do I have to tell my prospective employer that I'm pregnant? And you don't.
Right.
And they're things that, again, people sometimes just don't know.
Yeah, and an employer might take advantage and ask the question, which is something they shouldn't do.
Yes. And even just knowing that they shouldn't be doing that as well, and knowing that you shouldn't be penalised in those situations as well. And one thing I was really hoping with the book is that in times when, you might have so many other things going on in life, that it can be there to just assist you then when you might not have time to do the research. Right. So, if you are pregnant, reading your employment contract or reading about employment law, you probably don't want to do. You have more important things to be doing, right? You're preparing to bring a new life into this world. But actually, if there's, 3 pages or 4 pages on maternity in the book that you can turn to quickly, and it just gives you the key things you need to know, I feel that at that time when you're already probably quite stressed, that's hopefully quite valuable.
Okay. Your entitlement to see your own medical records. That was an interesting one for me, because I remember having these books, the kind of medical books, when you're like, they started out when you're really young, but as records become digitized, you still have a right to see your medical records as well. So it was really interesting to me to find out about medical records, that everyone's entitled to see their own medical records, even if they've been digitized as well.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something I would encourage people to do if they ever have concerns in relation to their medical care. Again, we often see doctors, GPs as these really, high up figures that we can't possibly challenge.
Right.
And I always hasten to add, especially with doctors and especially with the pressures in the NHS, they do fantastic work. But certainly if you have a concern, knowing that you can see your medical records, you can consider your medical records, and then you yourself can actually maybe whether it's speak to a lawyer and say, does this look about right? You know, you can do all of those things. And I think, again, you know, few things are more important than health, right? So I think knowing you have the rights there to see your medical records, that transparency, that exists is really important.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, it's information about you at the end of the day.
Of course.
I really like the fact that you included digital rights. The right to be forgotten was really interesting. And I think what it was, it's a recognition of the fact that part of being a citizen in the modern world is to be able to enforce your rights in digital spaces. Do you think that there's enough protection for individuals in digital spaces?
No. It's such and I think, especially, Damien, can I ask how old you are?
I 29.
Yeah, okay, so we're roughly the same age, right? Now, when social media was coming about, we were very young, right? And I fear even more for the younger generations, but we were thrown into this world, you know, and with no knowledge of the law, never would have crossed my mind when I was signing up to whatever it was back then, Bieber or MySpace when I was younger. But the thing is, these things aren't necessarily deleted. They still exist somewhere in that internet world. But none of us know our rights in relation to it. And I think things like the right to be forgotten are so important for people to know, because the reality is that the internet is almost really like runs in parallel now with our real lives.
Yeah.
So when it comes to employment opportunities, I was watching a YouTube video recently, and the person was saying that before they ever go on like an online date or whatever, or a date from someone they've met on an app, they'll always kind of Google search the person first. but I make all of these points to say that like the internet really is something that has a huge role in everyday real life now. So actually, if there are things that shouldn't be on you, shouldn't be online about you, that you have the legal right to get deleted.
Okay.
It's important that you know about those sorts of things. Yeah.
That's one of the things I don't like. So I've had you know, someone Google me before. I just think it's strange. For me, it's like Googling someone is not going to replace the knowledge and the experience that you have of actually meeting them.
Of course.
So why would, you know, if I had the chance to meet you, I'd rather meet you and know you that way rather than hear, you know, maybe something you've written, you know, in a magazine or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, that's just my opinion. But that was an interesting one. And, you know, again, in the digital world, I think it's interesting, like, we have content that's made about us. So, for instance, you might go to a party and there's a picture of you in the corner somewhere that someone was taking of someone else, but you may not want your image up there.
Of course.
So there's this question of, you know, how we can protect ourselves and our images in places that we don't necessarily expect. And in terms of ownership as well, because we have to try and steward the information that's about us. We can't necessarily, strictly speaking, own it all the time because of the conditions that are given to us by, you know, social media companies. I think a few years ago, Instagram had to change its, you know, terms and conditions because people were concerned that in it said that, you know, Instagram or Facebook would own this content.
Own the photo, yeah.
Right.
Very cool.
So, I mean, that became a problem. So there's this kind of increasing question about to what extent people can then actually say no. You know, a few people have written, have you seen anyone write these statements on Twitter that they don't approve of Twitter using or selling its information for any purpose? Because I'm sure you've heard about Elon Musk buying Twitter, and people are concerned that, you know, Twitter information is now going to be used to fed into kind of artificial intelligence programs and so on and so forth. So I think there's an interesting question there, and probably like a growing battle.
I was going to say, it's only going to grow. I think it's not like we're at the stage now where there's going to start being the backtrack of the digitalization and technology.
Right.
I think, if anything, it's going to grow even more.
Right.
So I think it's inherently a complex kind of area of law, but I think now is the time to try and get a grasp on it, because that then does mean that, you know, if there are changes that you think, you know, that's going to be a really slippery slope, you're actually in a position to challenge it. If you're always on the back foot when it comes to the law, these tech organizations can do what they want, know that the law is far too complicated for anybody to possibly challenge, and then they get away with all sorts. And I think in tech especially, you really do see this slippery slope effect. Even with my iPhone. I remember there was a phase when I said I'll never put my fingerprint on my iPhone, and
Okay.
just slowly through convenience and everything, you get deeper and deeper into the system. But I think that's really why it's important that you learn your rights as quickly as you can in these areas, so that when it does reach the point, for example, with Spotify now, my mum, she read something in one of these conditions, because since she read the book, she's super got into her rights now.
Yeah.
The auntie WhatsApp group.
Yeah,
Did you
yeah.
know? So she's on that right now.
Okay.
And she saw something in the Spotify terms and conditions, and to this day, she does not use Spotify. She stopped because she saw something that concerned her. And I think that's how we all should be.
Okay.
I think we should all have a bit of our red line and think, you know what?
Yeah,
Once it
absolutely.
crosses this point, not interested.
Okay, wow. Okay, that's good. But yeah, knowledge is power. As you say in the book, knowledge is power, and know your rights.
Absolutely.
So important. Stop and search and protest.
Yes.
So essentially, we're talking about interaction with the police. And I think this is how I first heard about the law in 60 seconds. What do you have to say about kind of the law with regard to interaction with police and stop and search? Do you think the law is balanced fairly in terms of individuals having, their rights to maintain their sovereignty in these situations? Or do you think, there are kind of changes that need to be made? Because looking at it, I think there are lots of things people have in these situations. For example, you don't necessarily have to answer a question from a police officer in a given situation. You don't necessarily have to give your details away if a police officer asks for them, or to have your picture taken of you. So what do you think about the balance of law in terms of interaction with the police?
I think at the foundational level, it's so important that a person is aware of their rights, and then from there they can choose how they want to respond. So for example, if I walked out here and a police officer came up to me and really politely asked me something and said, "Look, we're trying to just rule out X, Y, and Z. Like, where have you been past?" I'd be happy to tell them I was here.
Right, right.
But and it's important that I know I have the right to not share that information if I want to. Right. The reality is that statistics would show, let's take drugs, for example, black people are statistically less likely to take drugs. Then at the same time, we're more likely to be stopped and searched in relation to drugs. But then the find rate for black people is actually lower, which would suggest that actually the suspicion that police are having when it comes to stopping black individuals for drugs is almost
unfounded,
yes, or a much lower level of suspicion,
Yeah.
which I think is deeply worrying. So personally, for me, I think it's so important that stop and search are intelligence-led. I'm not somebody that necessarily calls for stop and search to be completely gotten rid of. I think it can actually be quite an important policing tool. But I think that the moment that it's abused, the way it can erode trust in communities is huge. And actually, what that then means, the wider implications of that, which might be that communities don't want to speak to the police because they think, you harassed me every day when I was walking home from school, stopping and searching me when I'd done nothing wrong. Why would I now want to volunteer any information that could assist with a crime? So yeah, I think it can really, when stop and search is done wrongly, just completely be counterproductive to policing objectives, really.
Okay. And so again, it's about knowledge of rights, and which is why I think every person should have a copy of the book, or at least even if it's just that chapter, because it's something that everybody will experience, and maybe from a particularly young age as well. And it's kind of an experience that you can have without kind of meaning to, in a different way that if you're renting a house, you're going to have a communication with your landlord,
Of course.
but you might be a 14-year-old walking to school and have to speak to a police officer. So you need to know how to deal with those situations.
And some people might say, I lead a law-abiding life. I'm never going to come into contact with the police. I hear stuff like this all the time. And I think, especially when you're in the legal profession, it's sad to hear, because the reality is that there isn't like a certain type of person that has legal issues. Like legal issues can affect any of us.
Right.
It can genuinely be a police interaction, a mistaken identity that means that you're finding yourself interacting with the police. And I just feel like, and I would always encourage people about this in relation to this as well, like read upon areas of law that you don't necessarily think are going to apply to you, because A, you might be surprised to find that one day they do, but B, when it comes to those around you, your loved ones, your friends, they might be going through those situations. And actually, I would like to think I'm a good friend to the people around me, right? But actually, part of me being a good friend is me feeling like I have a knowledge of the law, so that when they encounter situations, maybe they're stressed because their employer is treating them really wrongly, in addition to just kind of providing emotional support and sending lots of voice notes to them,
Right.
I can actually help them with the law a bit as well.
Okay, but as a barrister, you obviously get lots of people asking you questions like, oh, what do I do in this situation, that situation? So from now on, are you just going to say, buy the book, take the book and read the book?
Do you know when they ask me things, and I'm like, I spent 5 days writing this in the book, and you want to come on my WhatsApp? No, I'm joking. I'm always happy to help, because I think the reality is as well, in the same way I was shocked to realize the void that exists when it comes to people knowing their rights in relation to the law. And I would think, why wouldn't you try and make the effort to learn this? When it comes to things perhaps in relation to medicine, I don't have any knowledge there, and I probably should have more. And actually, I value the fact I can speak to people about that. So yeah, but then after maybe the 6th, 7th, 8th voice note, I think, hey, you might want to just consider that purchase now.
Okay, so on the 14th of May,
yes,
you are involved in a conference in collaboration with the University of Manchester and a charity. Can you tell us about that?
Of course, yes, charity called The Defendant. So basically, 14th of May, Public Legal Education Conference on the University of Manchester campus. The idea is that in the same way that this book was, the hope is that someone can read it from cover to cover and they have a basic knowledge of their everyday rights and can navigate the world with a bit more confidence, with their back that bit more straight, or that their back that bit straighter. The hope is that this public legal education conference can see to do the same thing.
Yeah.
So 10 till 4, you go there, you sit in a series of short, snappy lectures and go to kind of quick workshops on different areas, and you leave there a citizen that is informed about their rights. And like I say, it's not just about having that legal knowledge, but it's really about having confidence. I feel like in the absence of knowing your rights, you can so easily be controlled by others and pushed into situations. And I feel like if you're anybody that aspires to make a change in this world, or if you're anybody that just aspires to live a life a bit on their terms, you absolutely should know the rights that protect you. And you should be absolutely able to see when others are contravening your rights and contravening other people's rights, that you can actually stand up for them. So it's hoped that this conference will enable people to leave, able to do that. And yeah, it would be great if people are interested, if they could attend.
Yeah. So who is it open to?
Yes, open to everybody.
Okay.
And there will be talks from QCs, senior people within charities, loads of barristers that are specialised in particular areas, or have specialism in particular areas. So the idea is that, look, if you were to try and pay for these people's time, it will cost a heck of a lot of money,
right,
because some of the hourly rates these lawyers are on, not all actually, I should hasten to add, some wow,
yeah,
that's another conversation for another day, but for some, to pay for their time would be really expensive. But actually the reality is that they're going to be here at this event that we've deliberately made a kind of principled choice to make it free. Of course, it's not free to put on, so if people are able to donate, that's great, but it's free, so anybody can attend. And actually, again, trying to counteract what should have really been taught to people in schools, we're seeking to teach people on Saturday the 14th of May in Manchester.
That's absolutely brilliant. And we'll put information with regard to that in the video.
Much appreciated.
So there's only one more thing to cover.
Of course.
You wrote a book.
Yes.
Talk to us about the I mean, you mentioned, an agent got in touch with you, but in terms of the time, how long did it take to get from I want to do this to having a physical copy in your hand to having the final copy in your hand, and so on and so forth? What was that like?
Okay, yes. I'll probably say it's one of the most high pressure times of my life. So August 2018, my agent first got in touch, or my now agent first got in touch. It was August 2021 when the book came out. So 3 years. And it was, for a large portion of that, actually, you're writing what's called the book proposal. So that's where, or at least in my situation, working closely with my agent, really padding out the need for the book firstly, but why it's actually important, how it will assist people, how it will be set out, how it will be different to other books that might purport to explain the law in an accessible manner. And then once we kind of really got a very dense document setting out what that was, how that would look, you then effectively, I would say, pitch it to publishing houses, and then they will, if they're interested, make offers. And then it's then about having the conversation, seeing which one you think can really bring the dream or the ambitions of the book to life. I couldn't be happy with my publisher, Profile Books. Then I worked with my editor, Louisa, who was of huge assistance in helping me get it all together. And it's, you build genuine relationships with these people because, my agent, there were times when we were speaking on a daily basis to get this done. My editor, the exact same thing. So it really does become a joint effort, actually. And they're tapping in with their expertise to help you write the very best piece of work. But yeah, I think, I mean, the actual book cover design came really, really late in the day because I was deliberating for ages trying to get the perfect one. But it was important that it was something that was eye catching. And
Yeah.
it was important that, you know, you can get caught in, you know, the lawyer bubble of thinking the law is this thing that everyone really cares about. It's cool, it's trendy, but it's not. Okay.
Yeah.
And the reality is that I wanted the book to stand out. So just to give it a fighting chance against the other books, because I think the content is really so important.
Okay.
Yeah. So 3 years in total.
Wonderful. And can we expect to see more books in the future? Are you planning to write something else?
Not at the moment. So it's funny, when I first finished writing this, I'm never writing a book again. This was the hardest process. But now I've sort of forgotten how stressful it was.
Yeah.
I'm beginning to think, maybe, damn me, I'll write another book. So I think the reality is with the law book, it one day will kind of start to go out of date.
Right.
And what I have done in this one is whenever I was paying close attention to politics at the time of writing it. And when a politician would say something, the Tories do, we're going to scrap the whole Human Rights Act.
Right.
You know, things like that. But you might make a little note in the book just saying, look, this might go. So, you know, just check the law, you know, if you're reading this in a few years' time effectively. But yeah, do you know what? Because I've realized how much people needed this, it is something I'd certainly consider writing again. And I think the hardest part, I would say, in writing is actually first finding your voice. And I always used to hear authors talk about finding their voice. And I would never quite understand what it meant.
Yeah.
But I think now that I've, you know, through pain and hard work and sleepless nights, actually figured out how to find my voice, it's almost something I want to do more of and actually tapping into that and writing more books. So hopefully in the future, yes, but none are on the cards right now.
Okay. Well, Christian, I think it is such an important book. Maybe the most important book. Maybe an essential book for people to have, because of the information contained therein. Information from, you know, how to deal with housing situations with the landlord, to parking situations, to how to return something at a shop, to, you know, how to protect your image online, to what your human rights are. I think it's so important. So thank you very much for writing it. And I would encourage everyone, as much as possible, to go out and buy one.
Wow, thank you so much. And Dami, thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed this chat.
You are most welcome.